The first question would be, like, there is a lot of discussion. Slate is right about that. The media failed. They failed to, like, focus on real issues, gave too much attention at first to Trump, later was too late, and they were more or less treating him like a joke, and later like a celebrity. And I think a lot of people even didn't believe when you looked the election night that it would happen. But do you think the media have learned their lessons? And what would happen? What is discussion now? Would they just treat him as a legitimate, real, another president like Ronald Reagan?
Yeah, okay. The primary thing is that the voters made a bad decision. And to me, that doesn't mean that the media failed. I do think the media failed in certain respects, but I wouldn't even generalize about the media as a whole. I think parts of the media, particularly the print media, particularly the New York Times, the Washington Post, publications including Slate and the New Yorker and the Atlantic, did superb journalism about Trump. For example, Slate was the place that first really exposed Trump's ties to Russia, Paul Manafort, who was his campaign manager, his ties to the previous regime in Ukraine. And so there was a lot of excellent journalism about Trump. I think the cable news networks, especially at the beginning, covered him excessively and in a way that was much too neutral, where they didn't check his facts. They didn't really tell people how dishonest he was being in almost everything he said. And there's a phrase we use, false equivalence, which means that you treat the two sides as essentially equal and equally valid. And you say, well, Trump has this scandal, but Hillary Clinton has her email scandal. And you say, he might have said something that's untrue, but look at what she said that's untrue. And this time we had two candidates who were not equivalent in any way. We had one candidate, Donald Trump, who was outside what is normal in American democratic politics, who was a serial abuser of women, who expressed racist ideas, who expressed all sorts of bigotry, and who had a series of financial scandals, including the way he didn't pay people, wouldn't share his tax returns, which is always done in a presidential election. So I think the television media in particular did a very poor job at the beginning recognizing how different Trump was.
But at this time, would the television networks in general would learn their lessons? Of course, it would be a smart guess, but in generally, how would... There was a great piece of David Remnick on the New Yorker recently, the American Tragedy. So would it just be treated as, like, okay, he's a president-elect, now it's done, and we just forget?
I think the media is going to be much more polarized. I don't think it's going to be normal going forward. Part of what we've recognized is that a lot of Trump supporters live in an information bubble where they receive information through social media in a way many of the rest of us don't even see. But they get a lot of fake news. They get stories that are just not true in any respect, that are false propaganda, and that they can isolate themselves. And on Facebook, that fake news looks a lot like the real news that comes from reputable news organizations. So part of what we've recognized is that we live in worlds where we not only have different opinions, but we have different facts. And I don't think we can change that very easily because I think it's a product of the filter bubble of social media. But going forward in terms of what the media does, I think because Trump has the instincts of a dictator and is a natural authoritarian, he is going to treat the press that's friendly to him one way and the press that is fair and honest another way. So you're going to have media that includes Breitbart, which of course his campaign manager ran, Fox News, the National Enquirer, which is a scandal sheet known for stories that aren't true, but whose owner is very close to Donald Trump. And I think you're going to see the pro-Trump media getting access, being favorable about Trump, and being liked by the administration. And then you're going to see the media that regards itself as objective and telling the truth, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, being pushed away. And I think this may put them more in the role of being a kind of opposition press, which is not a comfortable role for them. It's not the role they want, but I think they may have no other choice.
So, in a way, what would make it different, for you? How do you think? What do you speak in your editorial house with your team?
Yeah.
So, like he's a president. We've written everything what was before and now.
Right. I think we're very focused on not normalizing Trump. So not treating Trump as an ordinary president just because he is now president. We want to preserve our sense of the strangeness of it, of the outrage of it. And we don't want to just be preaching to the choir. We don't want to just be denouncing Trump and always telling people how terrible he is. But we want to tell the truth, and we want to focus on the reality of the Trump presidency. And I think for us, that means avoiding some of the conventions about objectivity, neutrality, about there being two sides of everything. Slate writers have a point of view that they express clearly, but at the same time, we try to avoid being biased. We don't think of ourselves as partisan. We don't think of ourselves as partisan on the Democratic side, but we are partisan for independent journalism, for democratic society, for a liberal order, and we want to uphold those values in the way we write about Donald Trump.
What are the key 1, 2, 3 issues you would follow for the next month, and besides that, who is in his cabinet, which is obvious story?
Yeah. Trump made a lot of promises that were either impossible or very ill-advised. His most famous promise is to build the wall with Mexico. Probably his second biggest promise was to have sanctions on trade with China. Both of these things would be terrible ideas, maybe impossible. If he passed trade sanctions against China, they would retaliate. He, because of his personality, would retaliate against their retaliation, and you have a trade war, which could bring the American economy down, could be disastrous for the global economy. Will he be drawn into that? I hope not. But if he doesn't follow through on those basic promises that he's made to his supporters, and other basic promises too, to deport a lot of immigrants, to pull out of the Paris climate change accords, to repeal Obamacare. You can go down the list, and there are things he said again and again during the campaign that would not make very much sense in terms of policy. And I think the question now is he going to be influenced by the reality and back away from those promises? Or is he going to feel a commitment because of what he said during the campaign to go ahead and do these very irrational things?
And, his acceptance speech was it was totally different personality,
right.
like that. But do you really think as an opportunistic person he would really pursue his promises, or he'll do what would be good for him, also to be strong with the Republican Party, with the Congress?
People don't change their personalities. They don't change their personalities when they're in their 70s. And there were times during the campaign when he was always being called on to behave better, to be more mature, to act presidential. And he was often capable of doing it for 1 or 2 or 3 days, but he could never do it for longer than that. So I don't think it's realistic to think he's now going to be a changed person, that Donald Trump is going to become a statesman. Donald Trump is not a statesman. His presidency will look much more like the Berlusconi presidency or prime ministership. I don't think Trump is going to be different. He is going to have to figure out how to deal with Congress, with the press, and with the executive branch of government, among others. And whether he will be pragmatic or whether he will exercise his dictatorial tendencies, I don't know. I think Trump's instinct is to tell everyone how it will be and to try to punish them if they don't take his orders. I think that is likely to be his attitude towards the Republican Congress. I don't think he's very interested in a give and take about where they compromise. On the other hand, he may give them certain things they want to help him get what he wants.
But what we can also expect from the Republican Congress, he kind of insulted a lot of Republicans. I mean, the political establishment of the party didn't support him. But then he needs to fill the cabinet.
Right.
And people are thirsty to power. So what do you think that there would be not this kind of problem with the Republican Party? They would just be back and unified.
Well, there are two groups in the Republican Congress. They're the people who supported him strongly, like Jeff Sessions, and he's now on the list for a lot of different cabinet posts. Then there are the people who didn't really support him but never came out fully against him, like Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House. That's the group that Trump has to figure out how to work with. He'll reward his friends. He'll punish his enemies, the few Republicans who really opposed him. But the ones in the middle who are waiting to see how it came out and technically endorsed him but didn't really like him, that's the group that he now has to figure out how to accommodate.
What would be the policies we could expect from this? So would it be the question is somebody said okay, it doesn't matter if we have Trump, the Congress would kind of stop him in some crazy ideas.
No, they won't. The Congress won't stop him. The Congress won't stop him. There will be pockets of resistance to Trump. I think some of the federal judiciary will resist him, obviously. The Federal Reserve, which is independent, will resist him. I think people in the military may resist him if he gives illegal orders like supporting torture or military action that violates international law. Those are places I would look for people to stand up to him. I would not look to Republicans in Congress to challenge him. They won't. They'll lay down and he'll roll over them.
Your publication, they pointed out some relations to Russia, to the Kremlin. I know there is a lot of talks about that. There is not much hard evidence, but still, I know this the foreign policy analysts are guessing what's happening next. But still, what can we know? What can we speak at this stage in Trump's foreign relations?
Well, strangely, Trump's foreign policy seems very much in tune with Vladimir Putin's foreign policy. Trump is not a supporter or an advocate of NATO. He's a critic of NATO. He is not an opponent of Russian intervention in Syria or in Crimea. And in fact, the one way that he asked to change the Republican platform was to remove the disapproval of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So strangely, and it sounds so strange to say it, but I think he and Vladimir Putin are on the same wavelength. They have a mutual admiration society. What we don't know is how much they just happen to see things the same way and like each other from a distance, and how much there may have been an active collaboration going on. Because we do know that the Russians hacked the Democratic National Committee, that Trump was the beneficiary of them leaking that information through WikiLeaks. And so, they're on the same side.
So, but what would be this balance to Trump if he has Congress and everything else? Some people said the society, but what it means, how the American society, I'm not speaking about today, tomorrow, but within the next month and later a couple of years can somehow, organize themselves. What is a discussion? What is an alert besides going to Canada?
Yes. Well, there are two things. The first is Trump's relation to his supporters. He ran as a tribune of the working class, but already the day of his election, stocks of banks and financial institutions have shot up because people think that he's going to remove all the financial regulation that's been passed since the financial crisis. And it looks already like, as a billionaire, he is going to govern like an oligarch in the interests of other billionaires, not in the interests of his working class supporters. But in terms of the people who didn't support Trump, I think people are coming to grips with what it means now, how you can protest, how you can resist, what you can do. And I think people are trying to move from a feeling of despair and simply not being able to understand that the country's made this decision, to move from that to a feeling of being able to do something, either to prevent Trump from doing his worst or to start to undo some of the damage that he's likely to do.
What is in people's hand?
What is in people's hands? Well, there are lots of other levels of government. There's local government, there's state government, there's state legislatures, and there's civil society. You know, I think so many people had the reaction when Trump was elected that we're going to do something in our communities to support immigrants, to support a positive vision of race relations, to support women. You know, and we're going to, I have a daughter who's a teenager, and her friends are already talking since the election about what are they going to do to be active, to get involved. And I think the robustness of American civil society is a place that people can turn, because the liberals don't control any branch of government at a national level. They don't control the executive branch, they don't control the legislative branch, and they're about to lose control of the Supreme Court, which is now 4-4, but has an empty seat that's going to be filled by Donald Trump. But not controlling the government still leaves a whole world of activism that's open to you, where you're not demanding change from the national government, but you're trying to bring change yourself at a more local level.
And my final one, something like that, Trump has already betrayed his supporters, and he would. What would the supporters mention? Like that.
Right.
I mean, the people had, if they wanted, they had enough information that what he promised is not exactly who is he.
Yeah.
Do you have any hope in that?
There was a great line a writer had that Trump's supporters take him seriously but not literally, whereas a lot of people in the media take him literally but not seriously. So I think and I think there's truth to that. I think a lot of people who supported him not thinking that he really was going to do a lot of the things he said. They didn't necessarily think he was going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it and deport all the illegal immigrants. They see that as theater, as rhetoric. But at the same time, they expect him to govern on their behalf. And I think it's going to take some time for them to form an opinion about whether Trump really is on their side or he's on the side of the billionaires.